But I do think one thing that really irks me on the left, and I don't really have a lot of faith in the right, so you tend to criticize the people that you line up more, that you care more about, and that would be the Democrats for me. People lost trust in them because the voters were saying there was a concern. There were people across the board saying they had a concern. And the Democrats said, no, over here, look over here. They told the voters what to care about, and they did not listen when the voters said they cared. So these stories come out aren't about beating a dead horse. It's saying if they could have a fair conversation that we heard you, we saw it as they saw it, they'd be gaining some of the voters back to say, okay, we're not going to keep saying that.
You agree with that?
It started like any other morning on The View. The coffee was hot, the audience was clapping, and the hosts were ready to dive into another day of political chatter. But nobody expected the storm that was about to hit the studio.
I think that I want to move on from why the Democratic Party lost, and I want to hear from the Democratic Party about how we are going to take our country back and how what they are going to do to combat fascism and what they're going to do to stop the Medicaid cuts that are going on, to stop giving tax cuts to billionaires, to stop taking federal workers' pensions away, to stop taking federal jobs away, to stop taking education away, to stop attacking our institutions, to stopping, why is this Trump administration stopping medical research, cancer? I want to talk about why this administration is giving refugee status to South African white Afrikaners as opposed to Afghans and Ukrainians and people of color. That's what I want to talk about.
I think that's...
It began with a topic that's been simmering under the surface for months: President Joe Biden's mental state. One of the hosts brought it up, and you could feel the tension instantly shift. Smiles faded, backs stiffened, and what should have been a regular panel discussion exploded into live on-air chaos. The spark? A simple question. Is Joe Biden still mentally fit to run the country?
77% of Americans in 2023 said Joe Biden was too old to run again. And they were told, sit down, shut up, he is the nominee. And then when it became untenable and he stepped aside, they anointed Kamala Harris. There was not a primary, there was not a democratic process. And then when she lost, they said, don't look backward, we're moving forward, we're not even going to talk about why we didn't listen to you. We had Joe Biden here last week. It was an honor to have him. I think he is a good man. I do not think he could have been president for 4 more years. The hardest job on the planet.
Can this guy be president?
He was elected. I didn't vote for it.
Real quickly, President Biden took responsibility at this table, which is something that I'm frustrated with the Democrats. He said,
he did take
this falls on me. And I said that was the clearest answer of what people needed to hear.
And suddenly, it was like a dam broke. What followed wasn't just an argument. It was a complete unraveling of what's really going on behind the curtain of the Democratic Party. Accusations flew, tempers flared, and the elephant in the room? No one was avoiding it anymore. By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share more intriguing stories. Now let's continue.
Quoted in this book of saying they would be boxed out of meetings if they raise concerns, and there's very specific examples. George Clooney goes on the record to Jake Tapper and says he moved mountains. He flew in from Italy to do this record fundraiser for Joe Biden. Joe Biden didn't recognize George Clooney. One of the most recognizable, one of the most recognizable men on the planet. And now that's not a presidential duty. It's not the job. You don't have to recognize George Clooney. But does that give you confidence that in the middle of the night, if China's about to attack us, there's a breaking out in Iran, that he is the sharpest person to be able to handle that?
Which administration texted plans to their brother?
The Trump, but it's
Was
just
that
like
Joe Biden?
No, but do we just keep lowering the bar because Trump is bad? Nothing else is bad because Trump is bad?
But that can also be true.
Yeah, but the ship has sailed. It's out in the ocean somewhere with Biden.
We have Trump
it's over. Get over it.
No, we have Trump because you guys screwed this up. With all due respect.
All right, but does it help?
You could see it all in real time. A line had been crossed, and instead of pulling back, the co-hosts leaned into it. This wasn't about debates anymore. This was about secrets, cover-ups, and a growing fear that maybe, just maybe, the person in the Oval Office isn't really the one calling the shots. Alyssa Farah Griffin wasn't holding back. She looked straight at her co-hosts and said what millions of Americans have been thinking. This isn't just about aging or slowing down. This is a full-blown political cover-up. According to her, For the last 4 years, the Democratic Party, the media, and even members of Biden's own team have been working overtime to hide the truth. And that truth?
I actually think we
I
have
mean,
Trump
really.
because Trump lied to people. I think that's why we have.
He won more votes. That is a fact.
I think he lied to his base. I think he told his base that they were going to, their overtime would not be taxed. That was a lie.
Actually, that's in the new tax bill. It's literally in the tax bill in
They had to fight to put that in. They had to fight to put that back in. He had every intention of taking away that.
That's not true. He ran on no tax on tips, and it's in the tax bill.
Yeah, but it wasn't in it originally. I also
being
think
drafted
that a lot of
now.
people are, and Swazi pointed it out that it wasn't in there. I think the other thing that people need to realize is that they were lied to. Federal workers that voted for him, farmers that voted for
Immigrants
him,
that thought
immigrants
he'd
that
fix
voted
the
for him,
border, but-
they were lied to. That is why we have Trump, not because
And I'm going to
of
give
any
you
other driving
Okay, I'm
force.
going to.
That the President of the United States is no longer fit for the job. She didn't speak in vague terms either. She came with real examples. Alyssa talked about stories from insiders, staffers being boxed out of meetings just for raising concerns. She brought up George Clooney, yes. That George Clooney, who reportedly flew in from Italy for a Biden fundraiser, only for the president not to even recognize him. Now, sure, recognizing a celebrity isn't part of the job, but think about it. If you can't identify one of the most famous faces on the planet at a quiet, scripted event, how do you respond during a national emergency? A terrorist threat? A nuclear standoff? This wasn't a slip-up, Alyssa said. This was terrifying. The idea that the most powerful person in the world might not be fully aware of his surroundings? That's not just unsettling, it's dangerous. And the most disturbing part? According to her, they all knew. Every top Democrat, every major donor, everyone close to the inner circle, and they kept it quiet. And then the conversation took an even darker turn. Alyssa wasn't just angry about Biden's decline, she was furious about what happened after. When Biden's condition became too obvious to ignore, instead of opening things up to the public, instead of holding a fair Democratic primary, the party just handed the nomination over to Kamala Harris. No vote, no debate, no choice. And when she lost public support, the message was clear: don't look back, we're moving on. Like none of it even happened. Alyssa and Sarah both called it what it was: an insult to voters. The people had been raising alarms for years. Polls showed it, conversations at kitchen tables showed it. 77% of Americans believed Biden was too old to run again. That's not a fringe opinion. That's a national consensus. And what did they get in return? Silence. Dismissal. Orders to sit down and shut up. And when Biden did appear on The View recently, Alyssa pointed out something huge. Yes, he finally said, "This falls on me." But one sentence of honesty doesn't erase 4 years of deflection and gaslighting. One flicker of accountability doesn't rebuild trust. Not after being told for so long that everything was fine, that concerns were overblown, that voters were just imagining things. This wasn't leadership. This was manipulation. But Sunny Hostin wasn't having it. As Alyssa and Sarah dug into the Democratic Party's failures and demanded accountability, Sunny shifted gearshard. Instead of addressing the real concerns being raised, she rattled off a list of talking points that felt like a speech from another room. She started preaching about fighting fascism, saving Medicaid, protecting pensions, defending education-important topics. Sure, but none of them addressed what was actually being discussed. While two of her co-hosts were demanding truth about Biden's condition and the party's shady tactics, Sunny kept dodging. And then came the strangest moment yet. Out of nowhere, she claimed the Biden administration prioritized white South African refugees over Afghans and Ukrainians. It was like she was trying to turn the conversation into something else, entirely pulling race into a debate that wasn't about immigration at all. The tension was getting unbearable. The studio felt like it was about to crack in half. Alyssa and Sarah were saying, "Let's be honest. Let's talk about what really happened." But Sunny? She wanted a clean slate. She didn't want to rehash the past. She didn't want to talk about who lied, who ignored the voters, who covered things up. She just wanted to move forward, beat Trump, win the next election, and pretend the last 4 years never happened. But the rest of the panel wasn't letting that slide. Not this time. And that's when the breaking point hit. Sunny started calling for resistance C-note reform, not honesty, not solutions, just pure resistance. But Alyssa wasn't going to let that vague rally cry go unchecked. She leaned in and asked the real question. Resistance to what, exactly? The Democrats didn't control the House. They didn't control the Senate. And according to everything being said on that set, they didn't even have a fully functioning president in the White House. So what were they resisting? Reality? Alyssa laid it out clearly. They had already tried everything: marches, protests, filibusters, media spin. They staged, they shouted, they smeared the other side, and they still lost. So now what? More slogans? More distractions? At this point, Alyssa said, it felt like a cry for chaos, not because chaos was a strategy, but because they couldn't admit the truth. And that truth was brutal. The Democrats put the wrong man in office. And instead of owning it, instead of saying, we messed up, they turned on the voters, called them ignorant, called them racist, called them the problem. It was easier than admitting they'd lied, ignored warning signs, and forced the country to pretend like everything was fine while the foundation was already cracking underneath them. Then came the moment that stopped the room cold. Alyssa looked directly at Sonny and said what no one else on that panel dared to say out loud: Joe Biden is not mentally fit to be president. And just like that, everything went silent. You could feel the weight of those words hang in the air like smoke after a fire. Alyssa wasn't speculating. She wasn't guessing. She backed it up with facts. She brought up that poll again. 77% of Americans believed Biden was too old to run. Not just Republicans, not just conservatives. Americans. Period. And what did the Democratic Party do with that information? They buried it. No debates, no primaries, no options, just hand him the nomination and shut the rest of us up. And when things got too ridiculous to keep defending, they tried passing the torch to Kamala Harris again. No input from the people, no vote, just a decision made behind closed doors. Then Sonny, in the middle of all that, casually shrugged and said she didn't see anything wrong with it, as if bypassing democracy was no big deal. Alyssa couldn't believe it. That's when she reminded everyone that just last week, Biden had come to The View. She didn't vote for him, but she came in hoping for something real. And for a brief second, when Biden admitted, "This falls on me," it felt like honesty. But it wasn't enough. One moment of truth doesn't erase 4 years of lies. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more shocking, Alyssa dropped the bombshell that had everyone on set rattled. She revealed that at a major fundraiser packed with celebrities, cameras, donors, Joe Biden didn't recognize George Clooney. Not some random intern. Not a low-level staffer. George Clooney. One of the most recognizable faces on Earth. And no, knowing celebrities isn't in the Constitution, but if a sitting president can't identify someone that famous at a calm, pre-planned event, what happens when chaos strikes at 3 a.m.? What happens when a terror threat hits? When a nuclear alert sounds? This wasn't about glamour, this was about cognition. If Biden can blank on Clooney, who else or what else might he miss when it really matters? Joy Behar jumped in, desperate to pull the brakes. She tried using the same fallback argument she's used 100 times before. But Trump is worse, but it didn't land, not this time. Not with what had just been said. It wasn't just about who was worse. It was about whether the person in charge right now was capable of doing the job at all. Alyssa wasn't having the distraction. She cut through the noise, made it clear this wasn't political drama. This was a national security risk. And Joy's refusal to face that reality only made the whole thing more alarming. For some, protecting the party had clearly become more important than protecting the truth. As the shouting died down, the truth sat heavy in the room like smoke that wouldn't clear. Alyssa and Sarah, side by side now, weren't just voicing frustration, they were exposing something deeper. This wasn't about Trump versus Biden. This was about how the Democratic Party had handled the last 4 years. About how they ignored warning signs, dismissed public concerns, and refused to admit they'd made a massive mistake. Alyssa laid it out in plain language. The party didn't lose voters because of right-wing lies or internet conspiracies. They lost them because they didn't listen. People raised concerns. They saw Biden stumble through speeches, lose his place mid-sentence, freeze in public, drift off during interviews. Regular people could see what the media refused to say. Something was seriously wrong. But instead of facing it, Instead of saying, "Okay, let's talk about this," the Democratic elite told people they were crazy, that everything was fine, that asking questions made them disloyal. It wasn't just tone deaf, it was manipulative. And that's why, according to Alyssa and Sarah, Donald Trump won. Not because he tricked anyone, not because people were hateful, but because the Democrats pushed voters away with arrogance. They treated anyone who challenged the narrative like the enemy, and that's how they lost the trust of the very people they were supposed to represent. Sunny wasn't done yet, though. She launched into another defense of the Biden administration, this time going off on Trump. She blamed him for deceiving his base, breaking promises, lying to federal workers, farmers, and immigrants. She threw out claim after claim, trying to spin the entire mess as Trump's fault. But Alyssa didn't flinch. She fired right back, correcting the record point by point. One major clash came when they talked about taxes on tips. Sunny insisted it wasn't in the original bill. Alyssa snapped back, saying it was in the final version, and Trump did push for it. She wasn't going to let the facts get twisted, not this time. And behind every word Alyssa said, there was a deeper message. This wasn't about protecting Trump, it was about exposing the game the Democrats were playing. You can't keep yelling "Trump is evil" to shut down every conversation. People aren't buying it anymore. Americans wanted real answers, not distractions. Everyone had seen Biden freeze on stage, forget where he was, trail off in mid-sentence. The public didn't need to be told they'd seen it with their own eyes. But still, Sunny clung to this fantasy where the voters were just victims and the party had done nothing wrong. But Alyssa and Sarah weren't there to play along. They were done with fantasies. They were calling it what it was: denial. And that denial was tearing everything apart. As the studio tried to settle, it became clear this was no longer just a hot moment on daytime TV. This was something much bigger. Alyssa brought it all into focus. While Trump had been hammering home issues that most Americans actually care about: jobs, crime, border control, the Democratic Party, she said, had been lecturing the public about drag shows in schools and mandating pride flags on federal buildings. And here's the thing, it wasn't about being anti-progress or anti-LGBTQ. It was about priorities. People were struggling, rent was up, crime was rising, and communities were hurting. But instead of addressing those real problems, the party focused on symbolic gestures. They were so obsessed with looking morally right that they forgot what real leadership looks like. And this is where the story stopped being just about Joe Biden. Alyssa made it crystal clear the deeper issue wasn't just his age or mental decline. It was what his presidency exposed about the entire Democratic machine. That behind the curtain, the people truly running the show weren't elected by anyone. They were bureaucrats, Obama-era holdovers, and insiders pulling strings while the public thought Biden was in charge. It was a mirror, she said. With Biden too weak to lead, the party showed the country who they really were when no one was reining them in. And for a lot of lifelong Democrats, that reflection was terrifying. Because it wasn't what they thought they'd voted for. Not even close. And then, right before the credits could roll, Alyssa delivered the final blow. She revealed what happened during The View's own recent interview with Joe Biden, a moment that, according to her, confirmed everything they'd been warning about. Alyssa had looked him in the eye and asked the question everyone's been thinking, but too afraid to say out loud, "What about your mental state? Are you still sharp enough to lead?" This was Biden's moment to prove the critics wrong. To show the country that he was still in control, still capable of handling the pressure, but instead, he froze. He lost his train of thought. He drifted. And then, in one of the most telling moments of all, Jill Biden, his wife, quietly stepped in and answered for him. Think about that. The President of the United States couldn't finish his sentence, and the First Lady had to bail him out on national television. Alyssa didn't dance around it. She called it what it was, one of the most shameful political cover-ups in modern history. Not just a mistake, not just a bad decision. A deliberate plan to shield a man who was no longer able to do the job, all while pretending to the American people that nothing was wrong. Because according to her, Biden isn't running the country. A hidden team of unelected insiders is. And they weren't just allowing it, they engineered it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.